As a professional working in carbon markets, I know all too well that we need to be reducing our emissions by 8% year on year to keep within 1.5 degrees of global warming. The drastic societal response to the COVID-19 crisis will see emissions reduced somewhere between 4 and 7% for this year. Given that it has taken a literal pandemic to achieve what is not even the required emissions drop, is there hope that we will reach our targets? And if so, how?
Joel Fitzgibbon.
Well, Hamish, on the current trajectories, there's very little hope that we will even meet the targets, the modest targets set by the current government. And if I can just add to the answers on Kate, Zoe's spot on. The difference is politics. And for almost 20 years now, people have put their own political interests ahead of the national interests. And they are people on the left, the Greens, for example, when they voted against the CPRS in the Senate, and of course those on the right, including, if I can say most respectfully, Matt just alongside me, who have made this the central issue in a number of election campaigns. Now, it's very, very clear to all the experts that Scott Morrison has very little hope of meeting his 26 to 28% target by 2030, particularly, excluding Kyoto carryover credits. But this is where we find ourselves, and until we find some form of settlement, it's going to continue to be difficult. We're going to continue to fail. And the reality is, sadly, for those of us in the Labor Party, those who've waged war against decent energy policy, bringing certainty to investment, and decent carbon policy have been somewhat victorious. It's won the coalition a number of elections now, and we have to find ways now of dealing with that reality. So
what target should Labor take to the next election?
Well, I caused some controversy last October.
I know you did,
Hamish, by saying, look, we're 3 years in opposition now. There's nothing we can do for 3 years. The Labor Party wants more meaningful action on climate change.
So what does that look like?
And I posed the question, why don't we put all the focus on Scott Morrison by simply saying, well, for the next 3 years, we're just backing your target. And then if we were able to successfully get to 26 to 28% without causing any harm to the economy, then that would be a great platform from which to argue we can do better.
But isn't that the exact kind of political game you've just described as hampering Australia's efforts?
No, I think it's putting the focus back on Scott Morrison. I think that they too often get away with making big claims on their targets without demonstrating an ability to get there.
Sophia, is that the kind of action that's needed, or is that politics?
I think this is our great opportunity to really take this time that we've had to pause business as usual and just focus on our COVID recovery. This is our opportunity to get businesses to enshrine sustainability and climate change in their recovery efforts. I think that we can absolutely meet our targets if we decide to. If we can all work together and rebuild our businesses and rebuild the structures beyond the politics, I think that we can absolutely do it.
But you're sitting on a panel with two politicians, one of whom has said, let's ditch our target to get to 45% reduction in emissions by 2030. The other politician says we should get out of the Paris Agreement. What do you think of that?
I think it's incredibly short-sighted, and I think that the cost of getting out of Paris, I mean, Matt, I was really disappointed to read your Australian article where you call for Australia to withdraw from the Paris Climate Change Accord. I mean, as a Queenslander, I really feel strongly that we need to be meeting our targets in order to ensure that our future, that we don't have future catastrophic climate change, to make sure that we don't have warming above 1.5 degrees. Then also this is an opportunity to build industries and to create jobs around sustainability and merge so many different opportunities that we may have in this space.
Hamish, can I add something here?
Yes.
So the way I think of Paris is a room in which our trading partners, our customers, our states, our investors, and our companies are presently in negotiating what we're going to do in the future, what the industrial transition is going to look like, and where we need this to go. They're having conversations like, you need green steel? Oh, that's great. Maybe we can make green steel. Maybe we should chat about that. What are you doing with your targets? How are we going to work on this? Us saying, oh, we don't feel like being in Paris is just saying we don't want to be in the conversation. Right?
Matt Canavan, you don't want to be in the conversation. You don't want to be in the room.
Yeah, I do. I do. I'm desperate to be in the conversation. Look,
I'm sorry, but how can
Hamish,
you be in the conversation if you're saying that Australia should effectively leave that very room just described?
Okay, sorry, I was referring to the conversation we're just having, but it's a bit hard by video link. But we are not going to save the planet from here in Queensland. And I also heard before that our investors, our customers are all in this room. Well, as I've said before, China doesn't have any commitments in this agreement. Does anyone think that a country we can't trust to live up to a trade agreement signed a few years ago is going to seriously reduce their carbon emissions under a global agreement? That is absolute fairy tales. The United States has pulled out of Paris.
I remember.
And so this agreement is not working. It is not working for us. It is not working for the world. But unfortunately, it is causing an obsession among Australian policymakers to distort decision-making down a completely fruitless path. And now we've ended up with the result in the past 10 years
as a
where our manufacturing sector... Hang on, I didn't talk over this. Our manufacturing sector has declined for the first time on record in the last 10 years. So all this talk of creating new industries and having new jobs, we've gone backwards. And I think it's about time we reframe our priorities here and get back to reindustrialising this nation.
The answer to this...
Can I just... I think Zoe was trying to get in, so let's hear from her.
The emphasis on our industrial growth is a really good emphasis. And that is what our pathway needs to be about. To think of this as something, to look at China and say they're not taking this seriously. I remember being at negotiations almost 10 years ago, and at that time, that was where the blockage was coming from. And then a number of years later, at the same negotiations, hearing that the big press behind the scenes was China. And in the time that it had taken to go between those two negotiations, what had they done? They'd gone and built an industrial base.
They've done nothing.
A renewables
Of course they support
base.
it. Of course they supported it, because there was nothing imposed on them under the Paris Agreement. That's why they support it. They rejected Copenhagen because the world at the time wanted inspectors to go into China and assess that they were actually meeting their carbon emission reduction. So they pulled out. So instead we rolled over to them in Paris and gave them an agreement which imposed no obligations on them. And of course they signed up to it. Of course they did. And now we're left with an agreement which is transferring industrial wealth from the West and from Australia to China, a country that's bullying and threatening us at the moment.
I think that's just absolute rubbish, to be, with due respect, Matt, because at the end of the day, I think if there's one thing we can agree is we want to see a positive future for manufacturing and industry in Australia. Now, the two elements for that to be achievable is going to be affordable energy, the cheapest energy available. That will be renewables. The other aspect is we need to actually improve our manufacturing industry. At the moment, we have some of the most expensive manufacturing, the most least efficient from an output production point of view because it's so outdated. So if the government is serious about a manufacturing and industry-led stimulus, then it should be looking at really upgrading and making sure our manufacturing is at cutting edge, because the markets of the future will be green steel, green aluminium. There will not be place for dirty manufacturing.